So aside from the economic and demographic impact on Western Europe and Eastern Europe and the Middle East, aside from the social impact and the impact on the relationship between Christians in Eastern Roman Empire and Western Roman Empire, additional consequences of the Crusades includes the development of what's known as monastic military orders. Now, we have spent enough time with monasticism and ascetics for you to probably be a little bit surprised by this, that there would be circumstances under which monks, who are generally people who withdraw from things like battle, that there would be the taking up of arms of these ascetic individuals. For the most part, monastic military orders were dedicated to the protection of people involved in wars or battles, or the protection of people who got caught in the middle. So of the monastic military orders that emerge, there are a few, specifically the Order of St. Lazarus, the Order of the Teutonic Knights, and the Order of the Knights of St. John Hospitallers, who were dedicated to the care of people who were impacted by the Crusade battles. For example, individuals who maybe were fighting or who were simply citizens of an area who were sick or who were impoverished or who were pilgrims who were trying to get to holy sites and got caught in the middle. As well, and here's where they differ significantly from monks who would be located in a monastery, the Order of St. Lazarus, the Teutonics, and St. John Hospitallers also dedicated to care and defend to the death the particular sites where they were located or specific holy sites. So this is certainly one way in which these monastic military orders differ from monastic orders who are located in a specific space. So the Church of St. John the Baptist of the Hospitallers is located in this quarter here, and it's not a hospital that is functional today, but this is the chapel here, but you can see that the structure itself is quite massive, and it's been recently uncovered, and parts of it have been at least made safe and secure so that people can go inside and see the space in which the Knights of St. John Hospitaller would work. And here's a picture of one of the corridors that's not been restored. Other consequences of the Crusades include the organization of military medicine. Battle certainly provides the opportunity for people to learn about the body, even if they learn in ways and in situations that they wouldn't necessarily desire. So, for example, traumatology was something that certainly emerges out of the battlefield. For example, how does one address a wound such as this? Things like triage. So, for example, if you think about the fact that this individual here is being wounded and this individual is taking aim maybe at this person, if you have a physician up here or medical personnel, they're going to have to make decisions about which of these two individuals and their wounds need to be addressed. So being able to ascertain level of care and timing of care is certainly something that emerges out of a military situation. And we see, the notion of triage and the idea of triage beginning to emerge. The process of evacuation. How do you get people who are injured out of and away from a battle? And sometimes it was simply getting people away from other people who are fighting so that the individual might die, or get them to a place where they can be left until it is safe to retrieve them. So how do you move people who are injured or dying, and how do you do so safely? Hygiene is another factor in the organization or contemplation of military medicine. It's probably safe to say, although I wouldn't put a bet on it, that more people actually died during the Crusades of poor hygiene or things like starvation than actually engaging in battle with perceived enemies. So, things like diet are certainly elements of healthcare that are pressed to the limit during times of battle. And so you're thinking about how to move clean water or how to move food to keep it from going bad or to preserve it, and how to prepare it so that it doesn't spoil. These are all, again, parts of healthcare that we don't necessarily think of as medicinal. And then more dramatically, surgery. So how do you operate on someone who is injured, with what tools, and what if they're not clean? And that goes back really to hygiene. And then, of course, there's different types of wounds and how one addresses that. For example, the wound sustained by this individual is going to be different than the wound sustained by the person who's on the other end of this arrow eventually, because they're frozen in time. And so we see the construction of texts that address different kinds of weapons and how they would impact the body. This is a particularly interesting one. I love here how the heart is, it's shaped exactly like a pure and perfect Valentine, and the heart has just escaped being wounded. So these are all the different kinds of instruments of weapons that would be used during the time of the Crusades, although not probably the samurai sword. And you can see that here on this illustration, the artist has shown this is how, an arrow going into the thigh at this angle is going to create this kind of wound. A spear going into the side at this angle is going to create this kind of wound. So this is very theoretical, of course, because it is certainly not the case that somebody's just been sat there being hewn through with these different kinds of weapons. But nevertheless, you can see that there's thought put into what are the effects of these kinds of weapons on the body. Another consequence of the crusade is exposure to Islamic medicine and learning, and this is going to be to the benefit of both Christian doctors and Muslim doctors. And here's one example of a particularly troubling example of Western medicine. This is often put forward as a way of demonstrating that Western medicine is vastly inferior to Islamic medicine, and if this is actually a procedure, then it's worth, our concern is warranted. So in this particular text, the author writes, he, meaning the physician, said, "They brought before me a woman afflicted with imbecility. The woman I put on a diet and made her humor wet." Notice here we have Hippocrates, right? "Then a Frankish, meaning German, physician came to them and said, 'This man knows nothing about treating them.' He examined the woman and said, 'This is a woman in whose head there is a devil which has possessed her. Shave off her hair.' Accordingly they shaved it, and the woman began once more to eat their ordinary diet, garlic and mustard. Her imbecility took a turn for the worse. The physician then said, 'The devil has penetrated her head.' He took a razor, made a deep cruciform incision on her head, peeled off the skin at the middle of the incision until the bone of the skull was exposed, and rubbed it with salt. The woman expired instantly. I asked them whether my services were needed any longer," which I find almost a humorous phrase, "and when they replied in the negative, I returned home." So, of course, this is a demonstration of how Crusader medicine is far inferior to that of Muslim physicians. But there is another example by the same author, and so we want to keep that in perspective. So here's the other side of it. The author writes, I have, however, witnessed a case of their medicine, meaning the Frankish medicine, which was quite different from that. In Chézar, we had an artisan named Abu al-Faith, who had a boy whose neck was afflicted with scrofula, tuberculosis. Every time a part of it would close, another part would open. A Frank noticed the boy and said to the father of the boy, will you swear by your religion that if I prescribe to you a medicine which will cure the boy, you will charge nobody fees for prescribing it yourself? The man took the oath, and the Frank described the treatment to the father. The father treated the boy accordingly, and the boy was cured. I myself treated with this medicine many who were afflicted with such disease, and the treatment was successful in removing the cause of the complaint. So we do see here, if we take these texts together, texts written by the same author, that there is a to and fro, a back and forth, kind of a Doctors Without Borders situation going on here. So both of these together are a really nice example of the cultural interchange and the intellectual curiosity of the time. Finally, I would emphasize that in terms of consequences of the Crusades related to exposure to Islamic medicine and learning, that in addition to practice, we have to remember that also the exposure to Islamic medicine was also the exposure to Islamic learning, and this benefited both Western civilization and Western Christianity enormously. Because of the great emphasis on science and scientific learning and scientific study that one finds within Islam, a vast amount of texts in Greek were translated by Islamic scholars into Arabic and into Latin. And so scholars in the West who were in conversation with Islamic scholars were able to access texts that they had not had access to for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then, of course, we can't forget that Christian and Muslim interactions are not always just about fighting or not always just about learning. Sometimes, after you've spent a long day in the lab or a long day on the battlefield, you just need to settle down with a nice board game. So, some concluding points. The Crusades will promote change and advances in healthcare in the following ways that we've just taken a look at: in the emergence of military monastic orders who are dedicated to the care of particular sites and the care of individuals who are kind of caught in the crossfire while trying to reach those sites, but also the poor and ill who live there as well. The Crusades will promote changes and advances in healthcare also in the organization of military medicine. So the advancement and the knowledge gained by a lot of the experiences of individuals on the battlefield will help in the creation of mobile military units that will assist soldiers going forward in future centuries. And then finally, the Crusades will promote changes and advances in healthcare by exposing Western physicians and Eastern physicians to each other, to what each other understands about the body and medicine. And Western Christianity will especially benefit, and Western civilization will especially benefit by the superior knowledge of Muslim scholars around things like particular specialized elements of surgery, about the organization of teaching hospitals, and things like mobile military hospital units. So, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at isenbl@plu.edu. Thank you very much. Bye.